Welcome. Welcome to Gnostic Studies. We appreciate you tuning in. This evening, we would like to continue our Hermetic Masonry series with part 5. In the previous class, which we do not have a handout for the previous class, we covered some different catechisms from Old French Masonry from the 1700s and 1800s. And in those classes, we gave some somewhat rare or difficult to find or obscure or whatever you want to say, esoteric rites that the rites catechisms, because it's 3 different types of masonry that are, again, somewhat obscure. So we did a French rite from mid-1700s, a rite called the Adoniram rite from the late 1700s, and then we did the Memphis rite from the mid-1800s. When we talked about that, the Memphis rite, or sometimes it's called Rite of Memphis, we mention it because it has relevance to one of the authors that we study, Arnoldo Krumm-Heller. Huiracocha was a German who lived in Mexico some of his life and learned Spanish and translated a lot of, he studied German occultism, and then he had schools called the FRA, Fraternity Rose Cross Ancient Antigua, Ancient Rose Cross Fraternity, but the Spanish is FRA, a system that was propagated in Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, I believe even Brazil, Argentina, and some other places. So anyway, he definitely synthesized and brought over some German ideas from the early 1900s and beforehand. And according to some researchers, he even took or synthesized some of the information from this Rite of Memphis Mizraim, which was a combination of Egyptian, so-called Egyptian Masonic groups. So we'll just read a little bit about this guy, or just only in the past couple, maybe 10, 20 years getting the information in English. But a very interesting fellow, and you'll see what he has to say today about Masonry, occult Masonry to be specific. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them as usual in the comments area. We appreciate you tuning in, sharing time with us. We want to give you that high-grade, high-quality stuff. So let's get into it. Part 1, Rose Cross Secrets of Occult Masonry. It's from a chapter in one of the books we're studying called, what's it called? Gnostic and Esoteric Mysteries of Freemasonry, Lucifer, and the Great Work. We'll read some more lectures from that as we continue. This is, I believe, chapter 6. It says, a note about Arnoldo Krumm-Heller is the beginning, whose initiatic name was Huiracocha. It says, Krumm-Heller was a Mason and a member of the Memphis Mizraim branch of high-grade Masonry. Remember that in other languages, grade is the same thing as degree, so in English we could even say high-degree Masonry, but that's what they call it, even in English sometimes, high-grade Masonry. This rite had 97 degrees and was established in France in 1881. from the combination of two so-called Egyptian rites, the rite of Memphis and the rite of Mizraim. So again, we read the first three, we didn't read the first three, but the first three are readable on these pages. Apprentice, Fellow, Companion. On the website we read, I believe it was the Companion and the Master catechisms from the Memphis Rite in the previous class. The rite of Mizraim is said to have been popularized by Cagliostro in the late 1700s and was introduced into France in 1814. The rite of Memphis was introduced into France in 1839. So again, these were later combined together in 1881. But Eliphas Levi spoke about this before that happened, before the combination. In 1862, he says, in a letter that he wrote to the Baron Spedalieri, who was one of his students, Eckartshausen, that he was a German Mason, he wrote some very interesting books, belonged to the occult masonry of the Mizraim Rite, and he was the Grand Master therein. This rite was profaned in France by the materialistic disciples of the mysterious Cagliostro. The rite of Mizraim was affiliated with the Johannites or Templars, of whom the actual Grand Master was the Baron of Zappari. Their doctrine materialized itself and was corrupted. Krumm-Heller, this guy, states in his book Logos Mantra Magic in 1930, at the end of the section entitled Everything Radiates, I, who have nearly half a century of study in these matters behind me, who possess the highest degrees of Masonry, 33397, so you say he's talking about the 97 refers to this Memphis Mizraim, declare for myself that in vocalization, in the use of mantras and of prayer, and through the awakening of the sexual secretions, exists the only path to arrive at the goal, and all else that is not here is a miserable waste of time. Krumm-Heller has a unique perspective on the subject of Masonry, which is evident in the following 3 articles. We're only going to read 2. The third one is still available in the book if you wanted to read it. But there is something that must be remembered. Krumm-Heller speaks with the language and terminology of his time and perspective, the end of the age of Aquarius prior to the beginning of the end of the age of Pisces prior to the beginning of the age of Aquarius. Krumm-Heller talks about the same subjects and topics that we discuss in Gnosis, but he uses different terms to describe them. Do not let this confuse you in your studies. Remember to extract what is useful and discard what is useless so that you can benefit from anything. All right, let's see this article. Let's see if we have a date on it. Doesn't have a date. Okay. Probably in the, let's say, 1920s, 1930s, somewhere in there. The Rose Cross Secrets of Masonry. Often it has been requested of me that I write about occult masonry, but I have always refused, because I have thought that I should not have to waste any time with this. But lately, Ledbetter has published a book on masonry, just as Heindel had done before him, and so I have resolved to exit from silence. When reading these works, the same as the one by Jina Radasa, I have said to myself, either these authors do not know anything about occult masonry, or maybe they know and they do not want to speak about it. What is more probable is that thousands and thousands of Masons are going to the workshops, dedicating themselves to a very beautiful humanitarianism, but in order to not oversalt them with Masonry, and so as to make more practical work possible, they are being enlisted into the Salvation Army with the degree of lieutenant. For some years, the Theosophists have been installing Masonic bodies that they call, I believe, Masonry of Adoption or Adoptive Right Masonry. And in them, they receive women, and when practicing their ritual, they give some quite accurate symbolic explanations, which always means a step forward. But what they know and what they say is nothing compared with the true secrets of the fraternity. Right? And we read some catechisms related with what they call ladies' masonry or masonry of adoption or adoptive right masonry in the previous class. And I agree, they do give some accurate symbolism or some beautiful symbolism. We must not forget that masonry, just as much as the Catholic religion, in its rites and ceremonies, is nothing more than recollections of the real art or magic. The eminently wise Standemeyer, in his work Magic as Experimental Science, says, "We have certain nervous centers that we must excite in the experiments. With them, we can awaken and exteriorize our magical forces." Seems to be from 1912. These centers are in intimate relation with our endocrine glands, and they, in their turn, are susceptible to being provoked into functioning, in a given sense, with the oppression of certain arteries or the suppression of other nervous centers. The practice of how to do all of this is locked up in the giving of the signs, grips, and passwords of Masonry. How insignificant sometimes is the grip that is required. So remember, grips are like handshakes. In Spanish, they're called tocas, I believe, which means touches, or a way of touching, or we would say in English, a way of gripping. The treatments of Dr. Asuero have proven, who, when slightly interrupting the trigeminal nerve, heals diabetics in the act, and quadriplegics throw their crutches away. Who among the Masons present has ever suspected that such things existed behind our grips? And nevertheless, in Turkish Masonry and in the Rite of Memphis and Mizraim, the key is exhibited with complete clarity. The ancient rites, and those which are from the 9th century, give the practices mentioned with all the details, the days in which to do the practices, the grips, and how they are done, and in the same manner, their association with vocalization. This is a very interesting sentence. You can see there it's been underlined. We're going to see if we can get more information about that below in the section on Turkish Masonry. So I'm going to read it to you again, and let's see if we can remember the finer points of that sentence. The ancient rites, and those which are from the 9th century, give the practices mentioned with all the details. And he seems to be implying that the practice mentioned is how to do all this is in the signs, the grips, and the passwords. The ancient rites and those which are from the 9th century give the practices mentioned with all the details, the days in which to do the practices, the grips, how they are done, and in the same manner, their association with vocalization. All this is indicated in the Masonic calendar. They give instructions on the awakening of the chakras that a Mason of the Middle Ages called flames, And in those times, the neophyte had to learn to magically handle the passwords of the first and second degrees. In Rosario, Argentina, they have come back to realize this ancient rite. But nowadays, something curious happens. They do not have anything more than the Masonic patent issued in Italy, but they are missing what is essential, the key, because those degrees precisely lack it. They wanted me to give it to them, but despite my efforts, it was not possible. When I was giving a conference in the beautiful halls of the Union Lodge number 17, a brother who presided there launched himself into a discourse from the title of my presentation, which proved with complete clarity that they don't know much beyond what is in Masonry itself and in its relation with the Rose Cross fraternity. And at that time I said to myself, here you should not reveal anything, because they are not yet mature for these things. They want the ancient and sacred rite of Masonry to be handled the same way the Scots handle it. But I am not ready for that, since they have converted their Masonic system into a corpse. What's he talking about there, right? The Scots. The Masonic brothers can be sure that I, as a Rose Cross adept, am a Mason not by the diplomas that I own, because sometimes these are not worth the cost of the paper that has been spent on them. No, I am a Mason because I have comprehended the great secrets of the order. And here this is bolded and underlined by us for emphasis. The vowels I, A, O, which are enclosed within the passwords of the first degrees, must be pronounced in combination with the grips. And immediately the sanguineous, which means blood, current, the sanguineous current of our organism, undergoes an instantaneous modification, and it puts us into a condition for provoking psychic phenomena. A Turkish master mason who was with me for a time took a rabbit, and he put his fingers upon him in the form that the apprentice mason must make, and immediately the little animal was put into a state of catalepsy. Soon he did the same with the boy of 20 years, whom I believed was dead, but it was enough to give him the hand like the master mason does for that boy to instantaneously return to himself. For years and years I have experimented in the laboratory with the Masonic subjects, and every day I have been more and more convinced that we are truly possessors of a real grandiose and superior art with which we can teach official science. Will I be able to let the brother Masons participate in that which I have discovered? The future will say, and I will be seriously happy to be able to do so. What I can assure you of is that if you have seen me cure a paralyzed person or a blind person, like Dr. Asuero and many other so-called incurable patients, sometimes very instantaneously, I did not learn it in the school of medicine, but by meditating on the intimate subjects of Masonry, where I found much more, so much more than is commonly suspected. The dualism, and so now he's going to go into what he's found in Masonry, right? The dualism presented by the two columns of the temple signify the two aspects of the consciousness, that is to say, the conscious self and the subconscious self. Masonry has always appealed to reason and has applauded France when it excluded God-glorifying reason in a woman. Our reason certainly is, like the consciousness, the divine voice in us, but we cannot listen to its dictations clearly since we are put to sleep by our vices and bad habits, our prejudices and preoccupations, and it is necessary to liberate ourselves from them. We have been guided by our instincts too much, forgetting that we have intuition as a prominent divine factor which can guide us. But intuition does not work for us if we do not do magical exercises. We should study the movements before we do the exercises, and this has always been the privilege of the initiatic societies. Then, these exercises and everything that we do, like the steps and the movements and the different Masonic degrees, are not only psychotechnical practices, but they are also practices that can take us to a superior state of consciousness from the commonly known state of consciousness. The Masonic Catechism says that a Masonic lodge represents the universe, and that we admire the great architect of the universe. It has also been called the macrocosmic universe, putting it in front of us, we who are the microcosm, signifying that we are a synthesis of the great all, the great universe. And since we do not have a way to study the universe, the Mason must occupy themselves with the study of their self, with the study of themselves, in order to start their study of the secrets of the universe by analogy. Our self, represented for the Mason by the dualism of their columns, the J and the B columns. Our self is represented for the Mason by the dualism of the columns, J and B. The letters J should be the letter I. It obviously is related with Yod, the 10th Hebrew letter, because this vowel has always been the representation of the self in primitive languages. So the Yod, the 10th letter, could be J, I, or Y when we transliterate it. So he says that it's the representation of the self in primitive languages, and it has been preserved in the German Ich, in the English I, in the French je, in the Italian io, in the Spanish yo. We could follow with other languages. But the letter I not only has symbolic value, but also has real value through its sound. And the apprentice Mason must learn the articulation of the I well in order to awaken the inherent force in the sound of this vowel, which is always in intimate relation with the tattva reflected in the atmosphere and in the magnetic centers of the body. So remember that I is pronounced when you vocalize it as E. For these things, the dualism must be conscious. The columns are separated. One represents the subjective self, and the other the objective self. When we say, I enter through the door, we generally confuse our two selves, and thus we do not realize the true situation of the universe. The apprentice Mason should accustom themselves to the following way of thinking. I take my body through this door. Equally, when speaking, one should think, I make the E sound with my vocal cords. There is a difference between the internal self which speaks and the external self which pronounces. For the exercise of meditation, the Turks advise the apprentice Mason to take a grain or a seed and meditate upon it, on the potentiality which is locked up inside of it, and the faculty to be developed, which will come to be a flower, plant, and a tree. And all of this is possible thanks to the impulse of the great architect of the universe. Then they will take an imitation of a grain or a seed, as we see in a wax or rubber imitation fruit. If that occult power did not reside in the seed or the grain, then the great architect of the universe would not act. That takes care of real and unreal things, that living or dead aspect of things. The black and white floor represents the day and the night in relation to ourself Either we're in a state of vigilance or we're in a sleeping state. So that's the end of that article. What is he talking about when he says the occult power that resides in the grain, seed or grain? What does occult mean? You guys know? I know we got a little lag, so we're going to wait, see if anybody has an answer. Hidden, right? Hidden. Occult means hidden, exactly. That's correct. The hidden power. It refers to the hidden power that is inside the seed or grain. The hidden power in the seed. So we need to be able to differentiate things that have hidden power in them and things that do not. Things that are sort of pretending to be something and things that actually contain something that's hidden to the outside. But through meditation, we're able to access that. All right, second article. The Occult Masonry of Huiracocha. If we study the ancient mysteries, of which Masonry is undoubtedly a continuation, we will constantly observe that its symbolism is separate from its legitimately real philosophical value. If the purpose of the mysteries was to know a supra-physical world, this was because it truly exists, and because this is where one goes after death. Whereas the ordeals that are still maintained in apparent form were, in the ancient mysteries, real, and highlighted some aspect of the work that is needed in order to reach that supra-physical world. As we mentioned at the beginning of the course, we do have a class called The Mystery Religions of the Ancients that has some useful information and refers to how these so-called ancient mysteries were carried out in various cultures. And they also refer to certain ordeals that the initiate had to pass through in order to enter. Or we should say the candidate had to pass through in order to become an initiate. It is not possible that Masonry is divorced from the source from which it has sprung, that its symbolism only exists metaphorically, and that the I, or the Hebrew yod, for example, one of the columns, is only a vowel taken at random when another, quite different letter could have been taken instead. The Aleph of the Hebrews, which represents man between two worlds, would have lent itself beautifully to fulfill this symbolism in a most perfect way. Why, let us ask, was the I, or yod, taken for one column and the B, or the Hebrew bet, for the other? And why then are the words which start with those letters, Jachin and Boaz, the names of the columns of the Temple of Solomon? The finishing apprentices could give us a wealth of responses, which would rectify our ignorance, and we would have to hide because of embarrassment, since we 33-degree members did not know these things and asked such childish questions. But we, ignorant 33-degree members, know that there is something more, and that this is what our companions ignore. The symbols, we can say, are worth nothing in themselves if their meaning is not known. But the I, or yod, and the B, or bet, are realities, and there are concrete ways for those who know how to read. We have signs, grips, and passwords. something that at first seems silly and childish, may have been invented in a more complicated way, and nonetheless, these grips, these signs, and these words have not been respected. Let me read you that sentence again. We have signs, grips, and passwords. Something that at first seems silly and childish may have been invented in a more complicated way, and nonetheless, these grips, these signs, and these words have not been respected. Do you not think that all this could be an expression of something occult? Something hidden? Such is in fact the case. The signs are seen. The grips, are they not felt? And the words are heard. Then surely you need to see, feel, and hear something which is ignored, and which is, much later, to be perceived in its entirety. We see it, but we do not feel nor hear it, and we absolutely must feel and hear it. To do this, the ancient Masons had a section of secret instruction where they taught how to practically feel an I or yod and a B or bet, that is to say, a vowel and a consonant. Each of these senses, taken separately, are important in order to fulfill that which is desired, and this is the reason you need the cooperation of the three senses. Now let's take a piece of wood and a very interesting figure that is painted bronze. We wouldn't doubt that what we see before our eyes is truly shaped in bronze until we touch it. And then, until we touch it, we do not know its content. And the touch tells us that it is either metal or that it has the properties of wood. But one look convinces us that it is a work of bronze, dropped on the ground, and then the sound is what shows us our mistake. Behold, two senses were powerless to perceive the truth, and we needed to use the third. So he's saying, we look at it, it's painted bronze, so we think it's bronze. We touch it, it's painted bronze, it feels like bronze if they painted it well, so you don't feel the wood. But then if we drop it on the ground, it doesn't make a sound of bronze, it makes the sound of wood. And so through those three senses, we're able to, differentiate, deduce. So he's saying we need them, and those are related to the sign, which is given, the grip, which is felt, and the sign we see, should be more specific, the grip we feel, and then the word we hear. As for the sign of the apprentice, Masonry could change and use, for example, the sign of the fascists, whose salute is more airy and arrogant, but nonetheless the Masons have to use their own sign, that which is peculiar to them, bringing the right hand up to the throat, where the organ of the voice is, and where it flows with more or less intensity according to how this organ is constructed or loosened. So what he's talking about is sometimes when you're trying to communicate with somebody far away, at least in Western culture, you have your fingers straight, the four fingers excluding the thumb straight, and you turn your wrist back and forth, and you say like, cut it off around your neck, right? You say like, cut the music, or stop doing this. It's something like that. It's a different sign, but we'll see lower down the hand posture. But in any case, it's all part of something similar, something associated together, a hand posture, the neck. Remember how he was talking in the previous article about working with nerve centers? In any case, In the throat is where the voice, the organ of the voice, flows with more or less intensity according to how the organ is constricted or loosened. This no doubt has significance. The sign is combined with the voice, but this is in ourselves, and we must observe that we are not alone. Our brothers are with us, from which our self is but an extension, and we need the help of others in order to fulfill them. In order to fulfill with them what is wanted, the sign and the word. But then we speak. Masonry is not useful for anything when it is taken alone, because we need another, a companion, a brother or sister, who will be touched by the sign. And if we did not have anyone for this purpose, where would one find him or her? Note that there is always another who cannot be seen, another who is enclosed within ourselves, and this is the other one who must recognize the sign. This brother of ours, who goes with us through life, is our internal master, to whom the sign, the word, and the grip are given, in order to achieve certain hidden effects that will lead to another degree in the other plane, in the astral plane itself. So he's talking about what we call in Gnosis the inner being. Sometimes it's called Atman. Few know of it, and it is better that way. We ourselves cannot divulge it. The key is conquered through the internal preparation, or is given to the chosen by the master in the superior room. The only reason we have to write the above is in an effort to arouse the curiosity of those who study and encourage all to meditate. In Constantinople, I was recognized in occult masonry and saw the effects of our signs based on the teaching of a guru, or master, between columns, who was giving Masonic instructions. At the conclusion of the session, the astral spectrum was dissolved, and all the participants took this phenomenon as natural. In any Masonic lodge in Spain or America, this would have scared some. Others would have ignored the spiritualist centers, and few, very few, would have tried to repeat it. But we, in our Rose Cross lodges, will do so. So that one was from 1932. All right, so that was part one. We read what Krumm-Heller has to say about occult masonry, right? The hidden aspects of masonry. And now he mentioned Turkish masonry multiple times. Constantinople, Istanbul, right? That's in Turkey. So now, interestingly, he also mentioned IAO. In 1924, let's say 8 years prior to the publishing of that particular article, a book was published in German called The Practice of the Ancient Turkish Freemasons, The Key to Understanding Alchemy, by Rudolf Freiherr von Sebatendorf. It presented some very interesting concepts, including the idea that certain secret formulas were given to the Prophet Muhammad and that he passed these formula down to an intimate circle of his disciples. This is the secret knowledge of the so-called Oriental Freemasons. So here we go, quoting from that book. The Prophet distributed these formulas throughout the Quran according to a precise key, the so-called abbreviated letters, which are like esoteric acronyms or holy abbreviations. This secret doctrine explains that the surah or chapter of the Quran in which a formula occurs and specifies the number of days that a practice is to be repeated. The formulas are present in 29 surahs, which are said to be related to the 29 days of a synodic lunar month, as well as to 29 divisions of the physical body. This is the path of the dervish order. This is the path that the dervish order is accustomed to taking. This not only has to do with a general sort of knowledge, but they also attempt to acquire special powers by means of a specific practice. However, for the most part, the dervishes are the people who strive after higher knowledge and from whom the spiritual leaders of Islam will be drawn. If they pass the time of testing, which usually lasts 825 days, then they will receive higher initiation. Or, on the other hand, they may receive a more special instruction in order to attain certain magical characteristics. So again, that was German, originally in German from 1924. So Bottendorf then says that this higher initiation is related to certain exercises of Freemasonry and the work of the alchemists and Rosicrucians. So the higher initiation is related to exercises of Freemasonry and the work of the alchemists and Rosicrucians. These exercises are characterized by the use of the 3 signs of recognition employed by modern Freemasons: sign, grip, and word. So Bottendorf clarifies that these are not merely signs of recognition nor symbols, but rather magical operations designed to conduct the fine radiation of the primordial power in order to incorporate them into the body and thereby make the body more spiritual, to give the balance of power to the spirit over the body. The signs are 3 different positions of the hand known by the vowels which are indicated by them. All right, now those pictures come from another German book, not from the original German book we're referring to. But based on the description, they seem to be very similar. So don't take those images as the only way to do it. But anyway, these are the hand signs or grips or mudras. Later we'll see they're also called Rune-Grips, related to the vowels and therefore to vocalization. The number 1, the I sign, letter I. The right hand is in a fist, and from the fist, the index finger is extended straight out. So if you make a fist, actually your thumb is going to be in a different position than the way that it's shown there, because the thumb is going to be down, not up. It's going to be angled, right? If you make a fist and then bring out your index finger. The hand is put in such a position that the finger is directed straight upwards to the heights so that the letter I is represented. So it's sort of like a hand gesture to represent the letter I or the vertical line. Number 2, this A sign. The hand is held in such a way that all the fingers lay on a flat plane. The thumb is now extended so that it forms an angle of 90 degrees, a right angle with the line of the index finger. So that one does seem accurate there. Number 3, the O sign. Excuse me. One is to bend the fingers and the thumb of the angled hand in such a way that the tip of the thumb just touches the tip of the index finger. The thumb, index finger, and part of the hand between these 2 digits form a circle, an O. Okay, so that's just the hand positions or grips. Now we'll read again from Bottendorf and what he says. Oriental or Turkish Masonry, and a glimpse into its practice of vocalization. The indispensable condition upon entering the exercises is faith in God, the awareness that the individual is one with God. I repeat this reminder for those who wish to begin these exercises, which in no case can cause harm to anyone who has a selfless spirit. But they may be harmful to anyone who undertakes them with the selfish intention to delve into secrets which he or she is not supposed to know. In the best case, they will perform the exercises without success and will become annoyed at having spent money on such a worthless book. The work is divided into 3 parts: the preliminary work, the main work, and the pursuant work. Preliminary work. One stands upright, forms the I sign, and concentrates their whole attention on the uplifted finger while continuing to think of nothing other than E, E, E. One will soon notice that the finger begins to become warm in a most peculiar fashion. When this warming becomes noticeable, one allows the hand to fall, and after a while the A sign is formed. One should attempt to vivify the A in a similar way until one feels a dry warmth in the thumb. One immediately forms the O sign and animates it in the same way. The Oriental, who sequesters himself in the solitude of his dervish order, will feel definite signs of the kind indicated on the first day. The Occidental, which means Westerner, who will do the exercises no more than about 10 minutes in the morning or evening, will need a few days longer. As soon as the warming takes place, the student must form the I sign and animate the finger with C, 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 until they feel that it is becoming warm. One then lets their hand drop and immediately forms the A sign. One animates the angled hand with Sa, Sa, Sa. After a while, guides his hand to his neck, makes the hand grip, and thereby conducts the inducted rarefied forces of nature to his neck. During this, one constantly thinks Sa, 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 then sharply removes the hand. Note that this movement is related to the Masonic body posture that we talked about before, and then forms the O sign, which, after one has animated it with the syllable so, 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 one moves to the solar plexus in the master grip after a while. So obviously we may not know all the pieces, but the main idea is there, right? Use these hand signs combined with vocalization. The preliminary works encompass a span of 10 days. That is, 3 days of an animation with the simple vowel sounds and 7 days with the syllable made up of the vowel compounded with the S. So keep in mind, he's saying, when he says animate, we can understand that as vocalization. Okay, so without going any further into the system, I mean, there's a translation of the book in English you can get, so that would explain the whole system. But without going any further, we can certainly see, or it certainly seems, that Huiracocha was familiar with this system. But we refer you to the source material if you want to do more investigation. For our purposes, we're going to continue with the third part, which is a book that came out in 1933 by a German, which the book was called Rune Magic by Siegfried Adolf Kummer. And it describes some very interesting things, including runic hand postures, which he called Rune-Grips. We find remarkable similarities between Kummer's system and that of the so-called Oriental Freemasonry mentioned above. Now, it was written about 9 years later. Could be that he read that book and it influenced him. We don't know for sure. The hand postures or hand signs are very similar to those mentioned by Sabatendorf. So he's got these different rune hand grips. For the Is rune, you raise the left arm vertically upwards. The left hand will take the Is or Ich rune hand grip shown in figure 9. So there he's got the thumb inside the fist. The practitioner clenches the left hand, extends the index finger upwards, and sings from a deep to a high tone, E, right? That's deep. E, E. Sings from a deep to a high tone, the I or E sound repeatedly. Thoughts are directed to universal love and to the development of the magical force of the self or inner being. This grip can also be performed with the right hand. It then produces a different body current, which is also recommended. The R rune, A. Figure 10 shows the R rune grip, which is executed right-handed with the thumb bent as far down as possible. So here it's more than 90 degrees. And obviously you need to be careful because you can definitely stretch out your thumb if you push it too hard and hurt your tendon. So you don't really want to do it as far as possible, but just what's comfortable. You can see he gives the rune shapes to the right. Here, when singing the ah sound, especially electrical subtle forces are accumulated in the hand, causing the practitioner to feel a subtle tingling and a slight stinging or prickling in the thumb, the base of the thumb, and the middle of the hand. The outstretched fingers begin to vibrate slightly. Thoughts or inner meditations are directed towards absorbing R fire and the solar force. R fire is a runic concept. This grip has a particularly rejuvenating and strengthening effect on the life force. When it is circulated in the body by conscious willpower, a strong effect is produced in the solar plexus. The astral color is silver gray to light or bright gray-green. Okay, the last one, the Os rune. One stretches the left arm upwards, bending the thumb and forefinger of the outstretched hand so that the fingertips touch, as figure 4 shows. One sings O, the O sound, in the way already explained, raising and lowering the tone. So O, and then they give other ones where you do like a siren style, so it's like O. Soon one will feel a circulating oscillation of subtle forces in one's hand. This is the grip of Odin, Ode, and breath. It has an especially beneficial spiritual effect for the conscious rune practitioner. Often after this exercise, the smell of ozone can be detected on the hand. After finishing the exercise, the collected subtle forces are to be directed throughout the entire body by conscious willpower. The astral color vibration is light purple. Note that these are only 3 of the hand exercises given. The rest are given in the Gnostic Runology class. So if you want to find out more about them, you can follow that. That's going to be a whole other thing, but there does seem to be some overlap between them. Now the question is, so there's a handout for this class. This is the material that we needed to cover, but we've got more articles from Huiracocha that I'd like to cover with you. So we want to open it up for questions or comments, and then we may read some more, maybe take another 20 minutes or so. So if you guys have any questions or comments about what we read today related with occult masonry so far, the synthesis of the ideas that we've studied are that we need to do esoteric practices. Let's see this. Spelling. Here we go. He says, this is what Huiracocha says, Arnoldo Krumm-Heller. We've been guided by our instincts too much, forgetting that we have intuition as a prominent divine factor, which can guide us. Intuition can guide us. But intuition does not work for us if we do not do magical exercises. We should study the movements before we do the exercises, and this has always been the privilege of the initiatic societies. So we're looking at some practices which belong to initiatic societies. In this case, Turkish or so-called Oriental Freemasonry, hand postures, mudras, if you will, and vocalization in order to activate our internal faculties. All right. Doesn't look like there's any questions or comments. Let's jump into some articles. And this section is just a little bit further down of the article of the section that we just read, number 5. It's a subsection, Huiracocha, the Light and Initiation. Let's see what he has to say. He's a very interesting author. Clearly has some Kabbalistic knowledge as well as a unique perspective. The spiritual light initiation in the angelic hierarchies. If someone asks, "Do you see the light?" then we respond affirmatively. But what is most certain... Oh, we got a question, sorry. The lag, I gotta wait for the lag. The question is, the Masonic floor tiles, could night and day also represent the unconscious and the conscious mind? Could. Exactly. It could, the black and white could also represent that. The light and the shadow, it could represent the sleeping consciousness, the awakened consciousness, all of it. The spiritual light initiation in the angelic hierarchies. If someone asks, "Do you see the light?" then we respond affirmatively, right? Saying, yes, we see the light. But what is most certain is that we do not see the light. No one has seen the light except the initiates, and for this reason, seeing the light plays an important role within Masonry. What the whole world sees is not the light, but rather the fire that produces it. And so the questions remain, what is the light, and where did it come from? The first idea would be to assume that a central sun is charging at us, charging towards our system, and with that living fire that is peculiar to it. If we were to affirm this, then through this theory there would be many adherents, since it is very rational and soundly logical and has often been sustained by theosophists. But it is an error, a complete error. The light does not come from any sun, just as our thoughts do not come from the material brain. The brain is an instrument of the mind, just as the sun is an instrument of the light. Again, the light does not come from any sun. The truth is quite different, and it is far from any hypothesis or theory. Enclosed within it is one of the great initiatic secrets, rarely published. But it is very difficult to comprehend and accept it, except if it is not for someone who has received true initiation. Initiation consists precisely of this secret, in receiving the light, and only upon receiving it is it comprehended. The light, therefore, does not come from any planet, nor does it spring from any celestial body. It is simply the emanation of the zodiacal signs. But we are not saying that this is the light of the constellations. Instead, it is the environment where certain beings live. These beings are called elementaries, and they populate the whole of space. They are the superior angels, and they are the ones that must be communicated with, and the ones that communicate with us in order to verify our initiation. These beings populate the vast interplanetary space, and the light flows from them, of which humans only see its effects. So why should the human being aspire to see the light? Because the human being is a potential angel, and despite having a temporary carnal cover, right, our physical body, the human being is the beginning of the hierarchy of angels. Below them are the elementals, that is to say, the gnomes of the earth, the sylphs of the air, the undines of the water, and the salamanders of fire. But these four spiritual legions, which are lower than the human being, have their corresponding doubles in the superior planes among the angelic hierarchies, just like the salamanders, who act in the fire, have their correspondences in the angels of the light, who are the light itself. These resplendent bodies, and the light that dwells within us, are spoken of in the Gospels. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11 specifically. Note that what verse 36 says, "If thy whole body therefore be full of light, having no part dark, the whole shall be full of light, as when the bright shining of a candle doeth give thee light." Jesus himself said, "I am the light of the world," because he too belongs to these luminous entities who do not incarnate, although, as an exception, he did incarnate in order to save humanity. Next section, the science of the future, the astral light, and the magical exercises. We hope that the science of the future will learn what the light is. It cannot be measured nor weighed, but it is lived in the interior of one's divine being. The prophets, Kabbalists, mystics, and seers from all time have referred to this magical light and have affirmed that it is something inexplicable through human language. But they also say that what they are dealing with is a sublime thing that penetrates their whole being. This light radiates its powerful phosphorescence and is the reason why we see some initiate saints and fathers surrounded by a magnificent aura of white, powerful and divine light. The fact is that there exists the astral light of the Magi. Now this light becomes heat and is therefore in close and constant relation to the heat of our body. The seminal energy, or Ein Seminis, is made from this mysterious light. Know that the evil mind makes it so that this light cannot manifest itself in all its power. For its full manifestation, a person who wants to operate in the astral light has to be excited and pure, as Wagner has said in his opera Parsifal. Now let's remember what Ludwig Staudenmeier said in his 1912 work, Magic as Experimental Science. We have certain nervous centers that we must excite in the experiments. With them, we can awaken and exteriorize our magical forces. We must avail ourselves of the means at our disposal in order to study and manage the light. For this study, there has been and will always be sexual magic, right? We're talking about white tantra. Through profound meditative prayer with the mind pure and in an elevated and holy disposition, by mentally directing the currents of the Eins Seminis to the heart, this will give off interior light. But for those who are not capable of the purity and holiness required, it is better not to venture any further. You can be sure that someone is an initiate, whether a Mason, a Rose-Crossed Adept, or whomever, not simply due to the diplomas that they may own, because sometimes, as Huiracocha said, these are not worth the cost of the paper they are printed on, but because they have comprehended the great secrets of the mysteries. Years and years of experimenting in the laboratory with Masonic subjects has convinced Huiracocha that the ancient mysteries are truly in possession of a real, grandiose, and superior art with which we can teach official science. We have been guided by our instincts too much, forgetting that we have intuition as a prominent divine factor that can guide us. But intuition does not work for us if we do not do magical exercises. You see here we're repeating the same thing. We should study the movements before we do the exercises, and this has always been the privilege of the initiatic societies. These exercises and everything that is done in the different Masonic degrees are not only psychotechnical practices, but they are also practices that can take us to a superior state of consciousness from the commonly known state of consciousness. All right, this will be the last article that we're reading. The esoteric understanding of the light and how Huiracocha associates it with the runic alphabet. Again, we have a whole series on the runic alphabet, which we may do with you guys, but we're going to do astrology next. So you may need to study that on your own in order to be able to get into it. It's very long. It's like 40 some odd classes, but very worthwhile, very interesting. In any case, we're just going to scratch the surface with these this article here, and with the practices we mentioned from the previous page with the IAO, hand gestures. According to Huiracocha, human language is of a divine origin, and all its genesis proceeds from the light. That is to say, in its beginnings, it was a language of light. Let us remember that the Christ said, "I am the light of the world," and St. John repeated that the Logos, the verb or word, and the divine light were two aspects, two exponents of the same thing, and were consequently identical. That is, that the divine light and the verb or word, the Logos, are the same thing. If God, the divine force, the universal law, the great all, life in itself, the great energetic potentiality, literally everything, is the same and equal in essence and in substance with the word of light or the Logos, if God is the same and equal with the word of light or the Logos, then we are given a synthesis that encompasses and comprehends everything, and that can reach our imagination in a comprehensible way. Now, if the primordial spoken language was light, then it will be so again when we attain initiation. when we consciously return to God. Therefore, the written word must be of the same species and identical in its conditions. It must be light and should give us the divine substance that we need as environment and vehicle in our ascending march towards God on the initiatory path. Moreover, each letter, as a genetic principle, was in itself an exponent of light. But we are not talking about the letters that came after this principle or the imitations used by men in their different dialects, such as the Gothic, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, or Chinese letters, not even the symbolic language used by the Mayans. But we are referring to those that correspond to an alphabet much older than all others, and from which all dialects or alphabets surged forth. This primitive, unique, genesisizing language and father of all human languages is the runes. These runes are therefore light, and we can make them visible through runic magic, because although we know mantrams, mostly in Sanskrit and Hebrew, it has been necessary to return, to take the way back, in order to find the source from whence they came, in order to be able to grasp the most holy, the most effective, in its primordial sense. So it's sort of like a teaser for the runes, right? To encourage that the study of the runes. But we'll stop there. There is, of course, a handout with this. We have a handout with the other one, which has the graphics. So you can have a PDF. You don't need to be connected to the internet. You can look at that on your device or print it out, and you have it physically so that you can review the material in there if you want to do your vocalization with those hand grips. And we'll stop there for today's class. We want to open it up for questions and comments. I want to say we got somebody says, thank you for doing this. You're welcome. Another person says, this is truly beautiful. Thank you. Well, we're very happy that it's considered beautiful by you as well. Obviously, it's has impacted us. We received some benefit from listening to it, right? From reading it. And the more we read it, the more it opens up to explain more. But again, we have to remember what he says. This is key. We need to do the exercises. We need to do the practices, the psychotechnical practices. If you want to be a good accountant, you got to study math. You got to study, the contents of the system of accounting, putting things in certain categories, understanding things in a certain way. If you want to be a good athlete, you practice the exercises that help you to be better at running or shooting or, moving quickly or whatever it may be, right? Balancing, etc. If you want to be a good politician, you got to study oration, speaking to people, learning how to connect with people, sociology, psychology, right? But if you want to be a magician, or more specifically, if you want to return to God, because they are, in some sense, the same, because it's related to the path of the Magi, right? Did we see that on this page? Magi, where he talked about that. Might have been on the previous page. Let's go back and see if we can find Magi. Never mind. Doesn't look like it's there. Thought we did. Oh, there it is. It's right there. Didn't find it. Oh, because I put magic instead of magi. The fact is that there exists the astral light of the Magi. If we want to become a legitimate occultist, that is to learn to work with those things that are hidden to the materialists, then we need to practice in the same way that the athlete practices, that the politician practices, that the accountant practices. We need to practice too. And when we start the astrology course, we're going to give practices. There's practice. We'll study Huiracocha's astrology course, his zodiacal course, where we go through and he gives practices to do each month or each during the astrological sign. So does Samael Veor. We'll study his zodiacal course and esoteric treatise of Hermetic astrology and the practices that they give. So we'll have practices to do. And of course, we already know we can just simply vocalize, meditate and vocalize, that we need to begin there. But we need to remember that if we want to connect with the divinity, then we have to open ourselves up to the possibility that we could do such a thing. Because otherwise, if we don't believe it's possible, if we don't think it's possible to connect with divinity, then why would we do it? So first we open ourselves up. We say, well, this concept of the Gnostics, that we can connect with divinity, that every single person is able to connect with divinity, is an interesting concept. Now let's go to the experimental stage. Let's do some practices that they recommend and see what happens. We don't want to expect that we are going to have some amazing experience right away. We need to be patient, and it may take some time. It may take a long time. But if it's something that we think is worthwhile, is maybe valuable, then we dedicate that time and we stop putting a constraint on it. And we do our practices. We do our practices, and we start to see things change. All right, we got some more comments here. What's the website for these resources, the articles and PDFs? Good question. GnosticStudies.org. Let me give you, I'll put the URL in the chat there for you. Another comment. I follow you from Australia. Thank you for the program. Very comprehensive. I like the way you explain and practice with us the vocalizations. If you'd like to do sometime the ones you've explained today. Yep. That may be something that we're able to do in the future. What we're hoping is that we can have, because there's 4 weeks approximately for every zodiacal sign, and that we read 3 books, 2 from Samael and Veor, 1 from Huiracocha, and then the 4th week that we just do a practice. But depending on how long the week, depending on how long the chapter is, if it's like, we read it and it's 20 minutes and then it's over, then let's do a practice, right? Let's do a guided meditation. Let's sit and let's learn how to do it. Or let's practice doing it until we learn how to do it, until we learn how to do it for ourselves. So glad you all like the program. That's going to be it for now. If you have any more questions or comments, you can leave them. We'll check back and review the material so that, review your comments if you have any on the video, and then we'll respond to them at that time. So you can always email us at gnosticstudies@gmail.com. Oh, here we got a question. Where did the runes originate if it was prior to language? This is a very interesting question, and I don't think that we have an exact answer. But recently, we've found that there are runic shapes in Europe, but also in Ethiopia, They have a name. It's like the Southern Arabic, ancient South Arabic script or something like that. We're still doing research on that, but there's a very interesting shapes. There's a guy named Samir Osmanagovich or something like that. I probably just slaughtered his name, but anyway, he says that he's an archaeologist, and he says that there's pyramids all over the world and ancient structures, and talks about that. But we follow him on Facebook, and he posted some pictures of when he went to Ethiopia, investigated things going on there, looking at the obelisks there in Axum, AXUM, and because they have, I think, the tallest obelisks in the world there. And in one of the pictures, it had some shapes which looked like runes. And so as we were doing more research, it turns out that they're basically runic shapes, but they're not the same. So it's unclear where they originated from, but the idea being that it was like the original language or the original script for writing. But basically that's all we have. Yeah, it is very interesting. Very interesting. I agree. But anyway, maybe we can study that next year after we study astrology, because astrology is going to last a year. So in March, we're going to start studying that in probably like 3-4 weeks. We'll start studying that astrology. We'll go through all the signs. So that'll take a year. Then it'll be March again. We'll be done. Maybe we can study runes. Let's see how we feel. Let's see where things go. But anyway, we're going to do our best to present the material every week. Obviously we'll need to take a week off here and there, but that's the general plan, and we'll keep you posted on that. For now, it's every Thursday in the North America, Thursday evenings. In Australia it may be different, maybe Friday mornings, I'm not sure. But in any case, like I was saying, we can always respond if you want to send us an email, gnosticstudies@gmail.com, or you leave a comment on the video, and we'll do our best to respond. We'll sign off there. We want to thank you guys for your time, for your attention, and for sharing this with you, and we hope that it is useful, that you have benefited from it. And we always want to wish you the best in your esoteric